Right, so good afternoon, thanks students, and welcome to this Tuesday afternoon session. As I've said, it's around about almost 5 o'clock South Africa time, and it's our pleasure this afternoon, I wanted to say tonight, but I'm in Abu Dhabi, so it is tonight, to welcome Justin Westcott. So Justin and I go back quite a long way, and I'm going to have the privilege of reading his bio. So Justin is the Chief Technology Officer at Datagate, a South African cybersecurity company. Before going into cybersecurity, Justin was a military pilot in the South African Air Force. He then, for about 10 years, he's then transitioned into the private sector, and there he specializes in consulting, training, and the research domains. He particularly has a passion for cybersecurity risk management, vulnerability management, and cyber skills development. His roots in cybersecurity stem from penetration testing, digital forensics, and drone technologies. And his experience covers assisting organizations in assisting cybersecurity postures, maturing vulnerability management processes, and cybersecurity resilience building. Justin also enjoys bespoke training, cybersecurity training, and gamified cybersecurity training through Cyber Rangers. So he's got quite a broad CV, and it is really a pleasure to welcome Justin. Justin, the floor is yours.
Hi, Noel. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. To all 315 or 14 of you, I guess I'm one of those. So welcome. Today, I am going to be speaking about specifically cyber risk management. So the idea behind this is to introduce the concept of not just cyber risk management, but taking a controls-based approach to it, and to actually touch on some of the benefits that you can get in taking this type of approach. Because where traditional governance, risk and compliance, or GRC, dictates quite a lot, the controls-based approach to risk management is more the how-to GRC. So the idea behind this is to introduce a couple of concepts and to touch base and hopefully get a couple of questions, hopefully a lot of questions actually, around the implementation of controls-based risk management, and then how we can actually use that to reduce cost and balance cybersecurity and the drive towards good security, as well as maintaining compliance. So what I'm going to touch on is just the agenda, introduction to who we are as Datagate, and then touch on a couple of the concepts that I'd like to actually speak to you about. Datagate actually comes from originally a company called Novata in 2009. Datagate bought that company over in 2015, and I was fortunate to join Datagate a couple of years ago. And we do quite a lot. As Noel said, we play in the IT, OT, IoT, and industrial IoT space in terms of risk convergence. We have done and are doing some very nice research and implementations to test the types of methodologies that we're going to talk about. We do have some custom bespoke software based on those concepts, and we're fortunate to play in various roles as OEM, distributor, and resellers. What I want to touch on initially is the structures around governance, risk, and compliance. So in advance, I want to apologize to all spectrums in terms of cyber maturity. I know some of you are brand spanking new to the industry. Others have a couple of years of experience. So if I bore you at any point in time, please don't run away. I'm sure everyone will get something somewhere. So with that in mind, what we often see when we take a traditional approach to governance, risk, and compliance is we have some sort of influences. Those influences can be regulatory influences, like in the South African context, we have the likes of the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, the FSCA. There could be various, depending on your industry, different influences. Those influences can also extend to external influences beyond regulatory, in which you would require some sort of ISO certification. But the crux remains the same, is that we have policies, we have standards, we have procedures, but everything that we are actually talking about at the end of the day boils down and condenses to controls. So for a quick recap, let's quickly think about the three types of controls that we typically and traditionally engage on. We have physical controls, we have technical controls, and we have administrative controls. And when we look at those three types of controls, and we look at policies, procedures, and all the other elements that you see in front of you now, what we actually want is we want a policy, right, that is going to help us align to a certain standard, and that standard would hopefully point to a control that we can measure, and we can determine how effective it is. We can determine that if that control fails, what threat would realize, and if that control fails, what risks are being presented to our organization. And this is typically and traditionally why, if you think about governance, risk, and compliance, when you go through a risk assessment, why you look at your assets. You start that process by looking at your assets, you have a threat catalog, you have a risk catalog, and you apply them to your prioritized assets, right? And so why this for us is so important and why we feel so strongly about a controls-based cyber risk approach is because at the end of the day, if you see the controls in the center, surely we want to be in a position in which we understand our IT landscape, we understand therefore our networks, we understand all the different components that make up our cyber landscape, and we want to apply the right controls there. Because of the simple fact that if I know what controls I need, and if I know which controls are applicable, the physical, the administrative, or the technical controls, then when I manage my controls, I can technically go and report to a multitude of different compliance frameworks, right? So that is why it is important for us and why we really advocate for a controls-based approach when it comes to cyber risk management. Now, if we think about why we prefer it, because the question is, but Justin, why don't you just go through a statement of applicability to determine where your compliance is relevant, and then according to that, do the traditional GRC thing? If you think about how the landscape is evolving and what is the typical approach to cybersecurity? So let's quickly park the compliance discussion and we have a look at the cyber risk and we say, let's look at cybersecurity quickly. What is it operationally that we are typically and traditionally managing? It's controls. So if we were to take a strategic, a tactical, or operational view, surely a traditional GRC approach pushes governance down, which is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But in that, we get these rigid processes and procedures. And we determine in our statement of applicability, how applicable is that which I'm enforcing down. What we're advocating for is because of the increasing complexity of cyber threats and how the cyber threat landscape is changing. I mean, let's take a very simple example. The evolution of attacks that were typically endpoint driven and phishing and all the rest, starting to the sophisticated DNS attacks and all the rest. Surely we want to focus on our estate, identify our cyber landscape, what controls are applicable, report on the maturity of those controls relative to those threats and risks, right? And then, irrespective of if it's ISO, if it's CIS, if it's NIST, report back up. And the reason we advocate for that is what you see on your screen at the moment. The increasing complexity of cyber threats, if we take a traditional GRC approach, it can be hampering. And I'm not saying there's not a place for it, please. That's not what I'm saying. But in this balance between operationally fighting cyber threats and trying to maintain compliance, what we're saying is if this is the complexity and this is the cost, remember we have impact and probability, and if these are the costs of relative to the impact, then surely we should also be acknowledging that we should maybe get our controls relative to our organization. Now, with that in mind, what helps us, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of you on the call have done the likes of your ISC2, your CompTIAs, and all those various certifications, but it all boils down to domains, right? And I'm going to For those of you who know me, this is normal, but I'm going to be a bit controversial. And I'm going to ask the question, and I want you to ask yourself, when you started in cybersecurity or where you are today in cybersecurity, is the following statement true or false? The normal traditional approach in consideration to defining cybersecurity, we talk about people, we talk about processes, and we talk about technologies. Now, I want to just quickly stop you there and say, okay, what about facilities and what about data? Because if we take a normal approach and say people, processes, and technologies, then I would be adopting a traditional GRC approach. But if I have the ability, and I want to point a couple of things out here, by taking a controls-based approach, we suddenly include domains like embedded technology. So that means I'm starting to future-proof myself to edge computing, as an example. It also allows us to bring in the physical and environmental security because our data is hosted somewhere. So I would like you, and I challenge you to think about if you were now to take a controls-based approach, and as opposed to a normal traditional compliance-based approach and a normal GRC approach, there is so much more. And I'm going to explain to you also in a practical example where we have very recently, again, shown this to be quite effective. If you subscribe to a singular framework or a standard, whether that be strategic, tactical, operational, so we can split them up into those. Let's say operationally CIS 8 is what you're going to benchmark off of that. So you'll do your vulnerability audits, you'll do authenticated scans, you'll get all of that data in, and you'll report against vulnerability management, penetration testing, asset management, and all of those domains, you know, the 17, 18 domains that there are. What happens when we suddenly start saying, and we had this discussion actually about a week and a half ago with a customer who's a big mine, and he said, Justin, you know, we subscribe to NIST and we would like to achieve ISO, but our current constraint and the biggest concern operationally is third-party management. And he made the comment that by taking a controls-based approach, he could prioritize a domain that he knew was a high-risk domain, but was not necessarily comprehensive enough in the controls volume. And what I mean by that is, if we take a specific domain, and let's say for argument's sake, across these 33 domains, we have the NIST framework. Let's just use CSF 1.0, 1.1, sorry. I'm aware of 2.0, but I just want to kind of simplify it. Let's say across the 108 more or less controls in NIST, how many of those actually comprehensively cover a single domain? And what if your organization is one in which a traditional statement of applicability in a normal GRC approach actually said, I have less, because a lot of them do, right? A lot of them have third-party management, but maybe it's not as applicable. And so I really want you to think about the importance of defining controls in an organization. Number one, looking at the applicability of the controls to your organization, and then assessing the control maturity in order to have compliance as the consequence of good cyber risk management. And my opinion as to why that is so important is because we need compliance to be the consequence of good security practices. And again, I reiterate, I'm not saying there's not a place for GRC, but if we go and have a look at the cost of a data breach, and this is some information I've been sharing, is on the IBM reports of 2023, 2024, and 2025. Some of the biggest issues in terms of, if you look at the cost factors, if you look at the skills shortage and you look at the cost of a data breach, where there was a skills shortage versus there wasn't one, look at the cost measured in millions of rands in difference. When you look at complex security architectures, the more complicated architectures cost more. And interestingly enough, the non-compliant hacks cost more to actually recover from. So these were the top three influencing factors when it came to compliance and when it came to breach. So that is why it's so important that compliance should be the consequence of good practice. But what also came out in this study was, yes, the skill shortage, but also security system complexity. And I want to point out security system complexity because if you think about, if I took a normal GRC approach and I said, I need these 108 things, I have to go and do it. And at the same time, I have 100 different vendors trying to sell me 100 different things. And everybody has a finger in the pie. The complexities really increase. And that is why integrating controls and using a controls-based approach can reduce complexity as well of our security systems. Right. I want to point out that security system complexity can also be reduced through control consolidation, not just control integration. Remember the difference when it comes to risk management. Integrated controls means my controls speak to each other. Consolidated controls mean I have one control that is multifunctional. Right. Now I want to show you why or what the consequence of good cybersecurity control management is and how it reduces our compliance risk. On your screen, you will see, and this is just cherry picked, right? Just so that I could show the example. But do you remember those 33 domains that we touched on earlier? Here I just have asset management, disaster, business continuity and disaster recovery, compliance, configuration management, continuous monitoring, cryptographic protections, and endpoint security. Now, think about a mine as an example. And we obviously do a lot of research in that area and all the rest. If you go and have a look at and you ask the question, how do I take a technology agnostic approach to apply good security practice in order to get good compliance or compliance as a consequence? Well, have a look here. Just if I was operationally looking at CIS version 8, and if from a cloud or from an IoT perspective, I was using the Cloud Security Alliance's IoT Secure Controls Framework version 2. And on the OT side, the operational technology side, I was looking to be compliant on IEC 62443-4-2 and run along that. You'll see there's NIST, you'll see NIST 1.1, there's NIST 2, there's DORA as an example, and there's POPI. So do you see, and I'll just backtrack, look at the consequence. I have asset management in which I've set the rules for asset inventory. And just by having an asset inventory that fits those specific controls, it doesn't matter if I'm IT, OT, IoT, or industrial IoT, because by having the right asset inventory, I tick all those boxes. Now that needs to go into a management plan or a management program rather, and be managed and monitored going forward. So do you see whether it is a greenfields approach in which, and we see this sometimes, customers say, look, I don't really adhere to something, I need to go. This surely this is clearly depicts why it is important for us to know cybersecurity, have good security practices in place, and use our controls to manage risk that we can report towards compliance. Okay. I also want to point out a couple of key factors when it comes to managing risk, because we know you can mitigate risk, you can transfer risk, you can accept risk. There's a lot of, well, there's actually technically just 5 things that we can do with risk. But in that, we need to make decisions, and a business normally makes decisions based on cost. And I want to demonstrate to you now the value in taking some of those controls, and whilst acknowledging that we hopefully we agree, and if not, I'd love to have a debate here after in the Q&A on this approach, but integrated controls, now consolidating controls. If we look in the 2 years, 2023, 2024, right, at the factors that reduced the average breach cost, Now, I skipped off quickly, but I would just want to show you in 2023, into 2023, 2024, DevSecOps approach, having a solid approach with a proper strategy, was one of the biggest cost reducers, right? But look in 2024 into 2025, employee training was the largest contributor to a reduction in the average cost breach. Companies who did not have solid cyber awareness training, right? Guess what? They were the companies that, and just imagine this on the left-hand side, all of these on the left, each one of those, if you did it and you did it well, you would not be paying. And this is the average cost allocated to those integrated controls now. On the right-hand side, do you remember security system complexity? Look at how a more complex system increased the average cost. So imagine you had to take these costs and add this. How suddenly increasing complexity now increases my cost. And this, what I'm trying to show you here, is the implication of risk management. And if we have our controls under control, if we have our controls, I'm sorry, then guess what happens? If we have them, we monitor them, we manage them, and we mature them. And we start simplifying them by bringing them together. Guess what happens? We reduce the impact and the cost. So hopefully, and I'm not sure where we're on time. I'll be honest, I didn't really track it, but I'm kind of getting towards the end of what I want to say. There's two more slides I want to touch on, but what I want to get to is, yes.
Sorry, you fine for time. You've got about, from where you are now, you can take another 20 minutes if you want to.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, great. So and because I can push, thanks, Noel. So because I can do that, I want to now go and run down a couple of these points and these factors. And I want you to think about each of those. We've touched on employee training, and the reason it's important and the reason I touched on it is I want to zoom in here. Now, if we go and have a look in all of our different domains here, there is an entire domain for security awareness and training. Now, I'm not saying, and I want to point this out, a traditional GRC approach would require awareness training. We acknowledge that. But surely, as the industry trends change, like we saw from 2023 into 2024 and into 2025, what happened? We actually saw that there was a change. So surely we should be prioritizing our strategic domains of those controls according to what is happening in the actual industry, isn't it? And if we do that, we still have compliance as a consequence of good security. And this is just to quickly recap on that. What is rather interesting is if we had to now start looking at AI and machine learning driven insights. If you look, and this is quite interesting, those companies that used machine learning driven insights significantly reduced the cost of the breach. Well, why? Because if we think of it, and I'm just going to reference the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain quickly, right? And you guys on the internet, you can Google it if you're not sure about it. So Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. The first phase of those phases is what? Reconnaissance, right? So that means that if the enemy has insight, well, and I have an evolving external attack surface, then if I'm not using AI for insights, then I'm not going to have the intelligence. And this is a very important thing I also want you to remember in risk management. I took you, hopefully, on a journey from integrated controls, well, first controls-based risk management, to integrated controls that speak to each other, to consolidated controls and how together they can reduce the impact and the cost of a breach. But I asked the question, is risk static? It's impossible. Risk is not static. And that is why it is so important that we use intelligence-driven risk management approaches. And I often have this discussion because when you ask somebody, how do you use intelligence in the cyber domain? Most people will say, okay, you know what, it's the operational guys. They have a look at it, they use intelligence like where are the guys attacking from, which IPs are we going to block those IPs? And that is right. Operationally, I agree with that. But when we start going into the strategic level and we look at organizational risk management, surely because of the rate at which cybersecurity is advancing and changing, and because of how dynamic it is, surely we should also be making just-in-time, intelligence-based risk decisions. And that is something that we're not seeing. And this AI and machine learning driven insights plays a huge role. Now you can combine that to a certain degree with attack surface management over here, ASM. But I really want you to start thinking about that, the impact and the importance of intelligence-driven risk-based decisions. An example of that, a perfect example of that is we often find people that are doing vulnerability scanning as an example. And when they do the vulnerability scanning, they are taking that information and they're using it to manage, obviously, the endpoint risks and the attack surface risks and all the rest. But there's so many strategies to this that if you don't go and have a look at the impact of the control that you've applied to secure the asset and then the vulnerability on that, then if that context is not there, then what is the use of a single disclaimer, this is my vulnerability? It's context, right? And the reason I use that is because we want to identify the risk of that vulnerability on that asset. And that risk, and we see this with pen testing. If you think about pen testing, when you do pen testing, what are you doing? You're doing your reconnaissance, you're identifying your vulnerabilities, you are testing those vulnerabilities, and if you're able to exploit them, and if you are, you get access and entry, right? Now, what happens if the attack surface is the same, but the attackers are changing? It's only with intelligence that you can update something that yesterday that wasn't a risk becomes a risk today. And so that is the importance in cyber risk management of acknowledging, but not just acknowledging, actually consuming intelligence to monitor risk. That's the only way we can make just-in-time risk-based decisions. The last thing on this slide that I actually want to show you that for me was quite interesting is we find a lot of organizations are going through this whole digital transformation, right? And let's be a too little, too late, right? Depending on the size of your organization. But those a lot of those digitalization strategies are to the cloud. Now, if you go and have a look at factors that increase the average breach cost, one of the risks that is so under, what is the right word? I think it's one of the things that is really not spoken about that we need to acknowledge is that, we always talk about these things, security by design, right? Great. Whatever that means to you, great. But if you think about the migration to the cloud from on-premise, for example, we see security by design being applied to the destination. What we very often don't see, and that's why this drives up cost incredibly, is because what we don't see is the thought behind the actual migration. Because we have to open 2 gates to transfer that data. How are we transferring it? When are we transferring it? Who has got eyes on us whilst we're transferring it? Right? And I just wanted to highlight that because that for me is something that's been quite interesting for the last 2 to 3 years. Migration to the cloud has been increasing. There you can see migration to the cloud is increasing. And I'll be honest, I think if I was a betting man, which I'm not really, but if I was, I would reckon probably in the next report, it's going to go up a little bit more. So just something in terms of a side note in cyber risk. Now, does this work, right? I've taken you on this journey. I've blah, blah, blah for so long. The question is, does this work? And I want to use a very simple use case. We had a customer December a year ago who came to us, and they're a financial service provider, and they said, we have a problem. We don't know how to assess where we are and where we're going, but we have to give a report. We have to be able to say, we know what we're doing, and we have to put something together. And I mean, we all know how regulated the financial services industry, and rightfully so. But in the specific case, the problem that existed with the FSP was they had to prove that they can't be ignorant, right? So you have to say, well, I wasn't negligent, but I can't say I'm ignorant. So let me do some sort of a measurement. So what we did for them is we said, okay, we will use the NIST CSF 1.1 at that stage, but we will not do a full-blown NIST assessment, because that wouldn't be fair, right? Because we just said, what does GRC want us to do? Statement of applicability, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so we said, let's break down what you've got relative to the controls you need, and we assess the maturity of the controls you have. And we will take that and we'll report back to the 5 functions that are in NIST for identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Now, what I want to point out to you, and this is why I'm so passionate about the controls-based approach, because can you see this over here? In terms of protection, this company, with no cybersecurity advice, no IT backing, actually scored the highest on protection, because we inherently want to do it. We then broke down the organization into the controls, and by just implementing 5 consolidated controls, just 5 for that organization, we took them in a matter of weeks to and identify was at its lowest, and protect and detect being its highest, so that they could be enabled to respond and recover. Now, you might want to ask me, and the question will come, Justin, why don't you want 100% for everything? Why didn't they get 100% for everything? Well, if you remember, the applicability of the compliance framework is driven by what? The statement of applicability. And in exactly the same, by taking the controls they needed and applying it to where they needed it, we could boost their compliance just by 5 simple implementations. And by doing that, suddenly compliance became the consequence. Yes, we're doing this in the mining industry, we're doing it in the financial services industry, so it is industry agnostic, it's technology agnostic, but it is a different way of thinking. So in that, I want to leave you with a quote, and it's a long quote. So if you want to remember it, screenshot it. I don't even remember it, but it's something that I enjoy reading. Is achieving cyber resilience is about more than preparedness. It's having the capability to detect, respond, and recover swiftly from cyber threats. By developing a robust strategy anchored in sound security architecture and integrated controls, while proactively managing risk, we position ourselves to navigate today's evolving threat landscape with confidence. And in that, I want to make the statement, compliance becomes a consequence. So I've said a lot. I'm really hoping there's time for questions, because I'm really interested to see what questions I get.
Justin, fantastic presentation. Really enjoyed how you applied that to the real world. So thank you. We do have questions. So for the students who'd like to ask questions, you can raise your hand. I've got 2 questions just in the chat that I'd like to pose to you. They're both from Napo Masola. And Napo asks, firstly, how do you verify intelligence feeds to avoid noise, besides MITRE and other renowned publishers? And then perhaps you can answer this one first. Same person. Why is the identity desired column not 100%? But you actually answer that. So if it's how do you verify intelligence feeds to avoid noise? And then I'm probably going to move on to the live questions.
Okay, perfect. So I have addressed the one on identify, right? Because that was pre, so I showed pre and post. Even in identify, If you look at the first phases in NIST, just to touch on it, a lot of it is governance based. So if you remember, prior to NIST 2.0, where governance is overarching, right? Previously, governance was built in to the different functions. And so because they were such a small organization and we took a technology first based approach, in the short time that we had, we applied technical controls, but we didn't have the time to actually implement the policies that declared those controls in their processes and procedures. So identifier was a bit lower because of the governance component that wasn't in there. Okay. The second question in terms of verifying threat intelligence feeds. That is a difficult one because I know that there's this information overload that typically happens. What we do, right, and I can just use ourselves as an example. I'm not saying it's the right way to do it. We believe that more is less. Right? And in duplication comes truth. So we use, for lack of a better description, the truth triangulation. So we, for example, on the vulnerability management platform that we use, we have, I speak under corrections, either 12 or 14 different threat intelligence feeds. And we combine those feeds and then look at who is saying the same. Now, I know that there's a risk inherently involved because we saw this with Log4j. We saw this with Log4j when the last people on the bandwagon for the known vulnerability of Log4j was Rapid7, right? We know that. Everyone else had already declared it. But the risk, the probability of that one threat intelligence feed being an anomaly that is something that you need to react to is lower than the probability of everyone else being incorrect. So that is how we filter out. We believe more is less in actual feeds and rather use the masses, right? It's the whole hive mentality.
Thank you, Justin. I like that. So I'm now going to start taking questions from the audience. And our first question is coming from Rose Zweli-Banzi. Rose, will you just unmute your mic and ask your question, please? Hi, Rose. You just need to unmute your microphone. Yeah. Unmute. Rose, you need to unmute your mic. Yeah, there you go. Can you hear us? Okay, Rose is having some problems. I'll come back to you, Rose. Just sort that out. I'm going to go to Takunda next. Takunda, you can unmute your mic and ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I just have a question. So may you please comment on cases of smaller establishments that don't really have a lot of controls in place, that are actually still learning how best that they can implement GRC in the traditional sense and in this sense that you've just been discussing. Given the new landscape right now, I'm pretty sure the threat vectors have, I can't really say changed. Pardon my ignorance, I don't completely understand the effects of the emergence of AI tools into cyberspace right now. I don't have a full picture of how that has changed the threat vectors. So may you please comment on how best those smaller establishments can improve their position in security, ensuring that they're compliant, even though there are these new unanticipated risks that they themselves, not having a clearer background like other bigger establishments, still have to encounter. How may you please just comment? I hope it's clear. What I'm trying to put across is clear.
Sure. Thank you for the question. On that, with your comment on the AI, I like the comment. I think you are correct in terms of the vector, not necessarily the vectors, not so much changing, but the complexities for me lie in the attack chain in and of itself. Right. And I do believe that to a certain degree, from what I've seen is that AI hasn't necessarily made a script kiddie stronger, but rather the ability to chain together a series of events, right? That not necessarily they wouldn't have been able to get together themselves. Okay, that's just a side note. We've seen that with some of the Gen I implementations towards the end of last year. Now, in terms of the best way to approach GRC, I think the big take from your question that I'm getting is which do I put first, security versus compliance? Because that for me is kind of the big debate. Is because say, well, I don't know everything. I don't need to know everything. Quite frankly, I'm trying to run a business, but in that I need to establish governance, risk, and compliance. And for me, I'll be honest with you, there's two approaches. There's the business first approach, right? And the business first approach says,
Okay.
and I'll be quite frank from experience in different companies. The business first approach is I need to go out and make money. When I need to be compliant, I will. But I guarantee you, acknowledging the impact of a cyber event is I'm going to try and be preventative. And that is what I tried to point out in the protect in the slides that I showed. It is inherent in our nature to protect what we've got, right? And as we grow, part of protecting what we've got is actually also ensuring compliance, right? Because we're reporting towards compliance. So if you wanted a framework and said, Justin, what framework can I use to start off on? My recommendation would really be to look at something like NIST 2.0, because the applicability of the different of NIST 2.0 on the different industries is published on their website. And I think it would be a good read for anyone saying, I don't know where to start. Let me maybe look at NIST 2.0 and look at how it was applied in a specific industry. Especially there's one section just for SMBs. And if you're going to have a look at the SMB section on NIST 2.0, I think there will be some value in that. But in the interim, right, and that's what I'm saying is that's for the upskilling, right, towards compliance. In the interim, I would say business comes first and do the basics that you would have done in compliance anyway. Identify your critical assets that in your organization and prioritize them. Identify your business critical processes and prioritize them, and then put the delta together. And I'm giving you a very high level assessment, risk assessment 101. Go and see which assets partake, which high risk assets partake in your high risk processes, and then look at what controls you need to apply there to secure the process. Why? Because without the process and without the assets, you wouldn't be making money. So that would be a very simple, basic approach, like the baby step to just do that, because then you're going to start identifying your controls whilst you're upskilling yourself on something like NIST 2.0.
Thank you, Justin. You've got about a queue of 10 people waiting to ask questions. We've got roughly 15 minutes, so we're going to try and do a sprint here. Rose, are you able to unmute your mic now? Rose? Yes, I can hear you. No, it's gone and muted again. Now it's open. Hello, Rose, you can talk.
Good afternoon, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for the lesson. My question is on penetration testing to make intelligent decisions, right? So I wanted to find out if the penetration testing is done, let's say, on a regular basis, wouldn't that make the organization more prone to attacks, or can a more irregular schedule be a way to make sure that we still do the penetration testing and get data to make the intelligent decisions? Thank you.
I like that question. I really like that question. So let's think about the impact of a pen test on an organization. Because when we're doing vulnerability scanning into vulnerability management and we're maturing our vulnerability management program, in that, what we are doing is we're trying to gather as much information about ourselves as anyone else would see from out there. And the penetration testing takes the vulnerability management all the way through into vulnerability testing, right, to see if we can exploit it. And it extends past the technology into the human aspects as well, right? So now suddenly, you have a a young lady with a baby in her arms crying over the telephone, calling Justin saying, you need to pay my money, my husband died, let's just please bypass the process and pay me the money, right? Justin freaks out, he does it because he's under duress. It's not the same kind of stress that he would have been if he was physically, if it was a technological or technical attack, right? In trying to breach technical control. So in that, therein for me lies the value of penetration testing, in that you have all eyes on all aspects to try and breach all processes. But in that, the impact of regular pen testing, both the financial impact as well as the business disruption impact, for me, there's a value of penetration testing and doing it regularly, yes, but your regularly and my regularly might be different. I personally am more than comfortable, depending on the type of business you're in, doing a pen test once or twice a year, but ensuring that you have matured your vulnerability management program to the point where intelligence is informing what you fix, when and how, and that you're doing that more regularly, right? So my take on it is, first, if you want to regularly do pen testing, by all means, but to do that, you're going to have to make sure you've got a very mature vulnerability management program in place. Otherwise, you have diminished value from the pen test, number one, and number two, it's just it's financial overheads.
Thank you, Justin. Next up is Thuso Mokgatle. Thuso, the floor is yours. You can just unmute your mic.
One.
Cool. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. My question today is, okay, let's say we have two companies. One is using an integrated system control to monitor, analyze, execute, and to mitigate cyber threats. And the other one is using cyber insurance. Which company is more cyber safer concerning to cost if an attack can occur?
Okay, great. So there's a lot of context that I'm going to build in that you didn't give me, but unfortunately for the purpose of time, I'm going to give you the SuperSport Blitz version. In terms of weighing up integrated controls management and just buying insurance, let's think about the processes inherently in that. And what I mean by that is I want to give you an example of something that happened 2 weeks ago. So I was sitting in actually busy working on a cyber insurance product, by the way. So I was sitting in the office with the insurance company, and we were busy discussing all of these things. And the next minute, we found out that there was an email compromise. And I got the email, and there was phone calls, and everybody was just flying around, right? And everybody, because just for perspective, sorry, just maybe I didn't mention it, we do manage detection and response for customers, okay, just for context. So what had happened is there was an email compromise. And in that, it was specifically the purpose of it, from what we could do retrospectively and identify, was it was for reputational damage and scamming. Long story short is, I sat in the insurer's office, and in less than an hour, it took about 17, 18 minutes for everyone to react. Within less than an hour, everything was ops normal, everything had been treated, right? And we had to sit and wait to see what was going to happen next. The insurer themselves said that if that was a customer of theirs, that the customer would first have to identify that something went wrong. They would then have to put a claim in at the insurer. The insurer would have to then, when the forensic team was available, send out the forensic team to identify if there was a breach, and if so, what was the damage, and then remediation, response, and recovery could take place. So what I'm trying to say is, if you were to weigh up something like managed detection and response, where you've got SOC services and SIEM services and immediate response and recovery, then for me, it's a question of business disruption. If you're in a dynamic industry that you cannot afford to take 2 to 3 days to identify something went wrong, then lodge a claim at your insurer. And I'm not harping on cyber insurance. We've got it ourselves. We need it, right? But just understand the context relative to your question is that just because you've got insurance, just understand the processes and the business disruption depending on the risk that you're taking and the mitigation that you're applying. For me, I'd rather have a team on managed detection and response, immediately get the lights on, get everything fixed, than what I lodge a claim against an insurer, need to go through that whole process. We can't afford that business disruption. So I hope that gives a bit of context.
Thank you, Justin. I've got something that sort of clips into this in its own way. It's from Keldon Thompson. It's a written question. Given migration to the cloud, what about shadow IT risk and associated cost from a cyber risk perspective? Can't measure something you don't know about.
I agree with the comment. The question on what about shadow IT, it's a problem everywhere, I guarantee you. And that is why I do support the traditional approach of identifying all of your IT assets. Because remember, when we talk about the process of identifying your hardware assets, we include your software assets and we include your third-party vendors. So your software as a service providers. And if you are not doing regular risk assessments and you're not managing and maintaining a good asset inventory with a good ITSM, then essentially you cannot apply the relevant rules onto your endpoints for application whitelisting, for example, access to third-party portals and so on and so forth. And I think that is it's 100%. I agree. There's a problem with shadow IT, but in the cloud, going to the cloud, if you're consuming cloud services as a third party, then there are still ways. And the quickest way to find it out, do a risk assessment purely by starting and finding out what software assets and third-party assets are your endpoints actually accessing.
Yes, and ask around the coffee machine, who uses WeTransfer?
Yes.
Okay, next up is Mushfiq Assam. Mushfiq, you can unmute your mic. I just want to make sure that I've allowed your mic. You can go ahead and ask your question. Just unmute. Mushfiq? Okay, we're pushed for time, so I'm going to go to Chanda. Chanda, you can unmute your mic and ask your question.
Thank you very much. I hope you can get me. My question is, I wanted to ask concerning cyber risk management. When it comes to, is it possible that collective defense pacts, is it possible for collective defense pacts to take place? For example, NATO, Article 5, could extend to cyber attacks, but consensus is elusive. So is it possible that there can be collective defense pact when it comes to cyber risk management?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Can somebody please?
So, yeah, Justin. So the question is if you have a look at the notion of collective cyber defense, which works in the same way as traditional military collectives like NATO, if you apply that in cybersecurity, is that a good way of mitigating cyber risk?
Oh, I love
I don't
this.
think you've got any friends in cyberspace. It's going to be fine.
I absolutely love that question. I think that is a slippery slope, and I will explain to you why. The application of nation-state frameworks and the collective roles and responsibilities that they have means that the intent and purpose for which they actually get information and therefore the controls that they apply to maintain the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of that information is very different to when you're applying the same to a business or a corporation. So I don't want to delve into that by getting into trouble, but I think what I'm trying to say here is that I prefer international best practice with international standards when it comes to if you're using frameworks towards some sort of cybersecurity. I prefer those. Now, I'm not speaking to the likes of FEMA and all the rest in terms of crisis. I'm talking specifically about, like Noel said, in terms of the NATO standards. I definitely, again, I think the lens through which those frameworks are developed and maintained for me is very important. And I do, having been in the military structures and participated on different forums and things like that, being a civilian now, I've come to realize the value of like a private sector international standard built for corporations. And so I'm not saying it won't work. I'm saying that I think there will be pitfalls when it comes to control implementation because of the intent. Does that make sense?
We've got time for one last question. It's from Harry Kruger. Harry, you can go and unmute and ask your question. Thank you.
Okay. I hear about the cybersecurity skills gap and how big a effect it has on the cost of cyber breaches. In your opinion, what specific skills and areas of expertise are most critically needed in the cybersecurity workforce right now, and what are the most effective ways to bridge this gap?
Ooh, okay, love the question. I've only got 2 minutes. So traditionally and typically, those statements are made based on the NICE framework of competency and work roles, right? Which was developed with NIST and says that these are the positions and these are the roles that we should fill, and we don't have enough of them, right? So I just want to make the statement clear as to contextualize that. But what I want to make the statement on in terms of my opinion is that what we are lacking, right? And I want to quickly, hopefully I don't, I'm going to leave you with something to give the context. I'm sure you're all aware of the phrase, Jack of all trades, master of none. But I'm going to leave you with the original quote, and if you don't believe me, please go and Google it, because I believe this is what we are missing. Jack of all trades, master of none. More often better than the master of one. And what I feel we are lacking in cybersecurity are not necessarily just specialist roles as defined by the NICE framework for competencies. But we see this in Datagate, and we see this where we operate. What we are missing are people with a breadth of knowledge, because the most people that have gone into cybersecurity have got the depth. But we are struggling to find the breadth because of the change and the dynamics that are within cybersecurity. So this is my personal opinion. I speak here as Justin. I hope you remember that, because it really resonates with me, because that is why I'm passionate about courses like this. I'm passionate about the accelerator program that comes after this, and why, as long as I can, I will participate, because I feel that the exposure and the breadth of exposure that you get in programs like this is what is needed. And too often and too soon, people are specializing. And that's, as I said, that's just my opinion.
It's an excellent answer, and thank you for those insights, Justin. I need to thank you so much for giving what I think was a brilliant presentation. I'd like to thank the audience for all the questions and all your participation too. Mandla, David, and Pumalelo and Kerwin, I'm sorry we didn't get to your questions. I've got you in my head, and the next time I take question time and I see you, I'm going to give you a go. Justin, thank you for always supporting SANCS. I think this was a really hands-on, great discussion for the students. I learned a lot, and thank you for your time. We know you're a busy guy, and always a pleasure to have you. I want to say on the show, I'm not running a radio, but so thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. And to all of those, sorry, Noel, to all of those who have questions, you're welcome to pop a question in my inbox on LinkedIn. I am there. If you want to know if it's me, it's not this face on my LinkedIn, it's the Datagate Dragon. But you're always welcome to pop questions. I can't promise, I'm not very, well, I don't really use social media, but I am on LinkedIn. So you're welcome to pop me a couple of questions if you got it. And when I get to it, I'll definitely answer and have a chat.
Thank you, Justin. And I'd like to thank Emma for coming in and helping us today to run the show. And Katlego, thank you very much. Have a good evening, everyone, and enjoy the serious game after this. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.